The final request. The air in the execution chamber hummed with a low metallic thrum, a sound that seemed to vibrate in David Miller's bones. Strapped to the gurney, his gaze drifted to the observation window, a hazy blur of faces he neither knew nor cared to acknowledge. His chest felt hollow, a cavern where grief and resignation resided. The sterile white walls seemed to press in, mirroring the finality of his situation. Warden Thorne, a man whose face was etched with the grim duties of his office, stood beside the gurney, a watch in his hand, his posture rigid. "Any final words, Miller?" Thorne's voice was clipped, professional, devoid of emotion. It was the same tone he used when announcing meal times or yard privileges. David swallowed, his throat dry. "Just one request, Warden. You know what it is." His voice was raspy, the words feeling alien on his tongue. He didn't want to die with the bitter taste of injustice in his mouth, but he knew the moment was upon him. His wife, Sarah, was gone, and soon he would be too. He just needed to see Rex one last time. Thorne nodded, a barely perceptible dip of his head. He had anticipated this. It was an unusual request, unprecedented in his tenure, but Miller had been a K-9 officer, and the bond was legendary. "Bringing K-9-7, Officer Thompson." A door at the far end of the chamber opened, revealing prison guard Thompson, a man whose uniform seemed to hang on him rather than fit. Thompson's eyes darted nervously around the room, settling for a brief, anxious moment on David before quickly looking away. He gripped a thick leather leash, at the end of which trotted Rex, David's former partner. Rex entered the chamber, his powerful frame moving with a restrained elegance. His ears were perked, his dark eyes scanning the unfamiliar environment. He was older now, a fine dusting of grey around his muzzle, but the intelligence in his gaze remained undimmed. He moved with a subdued caution, the air of a highly trained animal in an alien place. Thompson kept a tight hold, Rex's head held low, almost apologetic. David's breath hitched. A profound wave of affection, sharp and aching, washed over him. "Rex," he whispered, his voice cracking. At the sound of his name, Rex's head snapped up. His eyes, usually so alert, widened with recognition. A low whine escaped him, a sound of pure, unadulterated yearning. He tugged gently on the leash, a silent plea to approach. Thompson, his knuckles white around the leather, guided Rex closer to the gurney. The dog's tail began a slow, tentative wag, his body language shifting from cautious to eager. David met Rex's gaze, a lifetime of shared patrols, dangerous missions, and quiet companionship flashing between them. He longed to reach out, to bury his fingers in the thick fur, but his arms were bound. Rex whined again, a soft, mournful sound, his nose twitching as he caught David's scent. He pressed his head against David's shin, a familiar gesture of comfort. David felt a tear trace a path down his temple, a hot, unwelcome presence. He was grateful for this moment, a final solace before the void. Then, without warning, the atmosphere in the chamber shattered. Rex's body stiffened. His ears swiveled, no longer focused on David, but on something else, something unseen to the humans. A low, guttural growl rumbled deep in his chest, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards. His hackles rose, a bristling ridge of fur along his spine. The air crackled with a sudden primal tension. Thompson, startled, tightened his grip on the leash, pulling Rex back slightly. "Easy, boy," he muttered, his voice a strained whisper. But Rex was no longer easy. His growl intensified, becoming a ferocious snarl, a sound of pure, unbridled aggression. His powerful jaws parted, revealing an array of formidable teeth. His eyes, usually so expressive, narrowed into slits of dangerous intent. He began to strain against the leash, his muscles coiling, his focus locked on a single target. David's gaze followed Rex's line of sight. It wasn't him. It wasn't Warden Thorne. It was prison guard Thompson. Rex lunged. The sudden, explosive movement yanked the leash from Thompson's grasp. The guard, unprepared, stumbled back with a yelp of surprise and fear. Rex, now free, sprang forward, a blur of muscle and fury. His snarling maw snapped inches from Thompson's leg, a clear warning. Thompson, pale and trembling, scrambled backward, tripping over his own feet, a desperate cry escaping his lips. "Hold him! Get him under control!" Warden Thorne barked, his voice sharp with alarm, his carefully maintained composure cracking. The execution, a meticulously planned event, was spiraling into chaos. Rex continued his aggressive display, circling Thompson, a low, menacing snarl rumbling in his throat. He wasn't attacking to kill, not yet, but his intent was clear. This man was a threat, and Rex was protecting something, or someone. His teeth were bared, his body coiled, ready to strike if Thompson dared to move closer to David. Thompson, now cowering against the wall, his face ashen, stammered, I don't know what's wrong with him. He's never done this." Warden Thorne, his brow furrowed in a mixture of confusion and irritation, raised a hand. "Stop. Everyone, just stop." The guards present in the chamber, their weapons drawn, hesitated. "Thompson, get out of the chamber. Take the dog with you, if you can." Thompson, still visibly shaken, gingerly approached Rex, his movements slow and tentative. But the moment he got too close, Rex let out another furious bark, a sound that echoed ominously in the confines of the chamber. The dog's protective stance around David remained unwavering. Thorne, observing the scene, his mind racing, saw the undeniable intensity in Rex's reaction. It wasn't a random outburst. It was targeted, deliberate. The dog, trained to detect narcotics, explosives, and human scents, was clearly agitated by something specific concerning Thompson. An instinct, honed by years of managing volatile situations, stirred within him. This is highly unusual," Thorne muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. He glanced at the clock on the wall. The execution was mere minutes away. He looked at David, then back at the snarling dog and the trembling guard. The air hung thick with unanswered questions. "Warden," David's voice, though weak, carried a new urgency. "He knows something. Rex always knows." Thorne hesitated. His duty was clear, but the inexplicable aggression of a highly trained canine officer, a dog renowned for its unwavering loyalty and perception, was too significant to ignore. There was a palpable shift in the air, a crack in the carefully constructed order of the prison. "Delay the procedure," Thorne announced, his voice firm, cutting through the lingering tension. "Momentarily. Get that dog out of here, but keep Thompson confined. I want to know exactly what just happened." The pronouncement hung in the air, a reprieve David hadn't dared to hope for. Rex, though still growling, seemed to sense the shift, his intense focus wavering for a fraction of a second. The door to the chamber clicked shut, leaving David alone again. But this time, a sliver of desperate hope had pierced the suffocating gloom. The sterile air of the execution chamber still hummed with an unspoken tension. a fragile thread woven between the warden's unexpected decision and the metallic tang of impending doom. David, strapped to the gurney, felt the ghost of Rex's powerful lunge, the low rumble of his growl, resonate through his memory. It wasn't a memory of the present, but an echo of a past where that loyalty was his shield, his sword, his very definition. The stark white walls of the chamber blurred, replaced by the vibrant greens and earthy browns of the canine training grounds. The scent of damp earth, sweat, and pine needles filled his nostrils, a stark contrast to the antiseptic sting of the execution room. He saw a younger Rex, a lean, muscular German shepherd puppy with eyes full of mischievous intelligence, tumbling through an obstacle course. David, then a fresh-faced recruit, matched his partner's boundless energy, guiding him with gentle commands and an unspoken understanding that transcended words. Their days were a relentless cycle of discipline and discovery. Mornings began with scent work, Rex's nose a finely tuned instrument, dissecting the invisible tapestry of odours. David recalled the long hours spent hiding minute packets of pseudo-narcotics, then watching Rex, tail wagging with focused determination, pinpointing them with unerring accuracy. The dog's body language was a symphony David learned to read. The subtle stiffening of his posture, the quick flick of an ear, the almost imperceptible tremor in his nose when he hit a scent cone. They moved as one, a seamless extension of each other's will. The training intensified, moving from controlled environments to more complex scenarios. They practiced apprehension drills, Rex's powerful jaws clamping down on the padded arm of a decoy, his grip firm, unwavering. David remembered the first time Rex tracked a human scent for miles through dense woodland, never faltering, his focus absolute. He'd learned to trust Rex's instincts implicitly, a trust forged in the crucible of countless repetitions and shared triumphs. Their bond wasn't just professional, it was primal, an unbreakable pact between man and beast. Other handlers admired their synchronicity, often remarking on how David and Rex seemed to anticipate each other's next move. Their reputation as an elite canine unit quickly solidified. David remembered the adrenaline surge of their first successful drug bust, Rex digging frantically at a loose floorboard in a suspected hideout, unearthing a stash that had eluded human searchers. There was the harrowing night chase through a derelict industrial park, Rex tracking a fleeing suspect through a maze of rusting machinery and shattered glass, his barks echoing through the darkness until the man was cornered. Each success deepened their mutual reliance. David learned to interpret Rex's whines and barks, not just as sounds, but as a complex language of alerts, warnings, and confirmations. Rex, in turn, responded to David's subtle hand signals, the cadence of his voice, even the tension in his shoulders. One particular memory stood out, sharp and vivid. A missing child case. A little girl lost in a vast nature preserve. The clock had been ticking, the weather turning. Hours stretched into a desperate search. David had watched Rex, exhausted but relentless, his nose to the ground, pulling him forward through thick underbrush. When Rex finally stopped, whining softly at the base of a hollowed-out log, and the little girl was found, shivering but safe, David had felt a profound surge of emotion. He'd knelt beside Rex, burying his face in the dog's fur, feeling the steady thump of his heart, a shared victory that transcended duty. That night, back at the precinct, after the commendations and the relief had subsided, David had shared his dinner with Rex, letting the dog eat from his hand, a silent acknowledgement of their extraordinary partnership. Rex had looked up at him, those intelligent eyes reflecting an unwavering devotion, a loyalty as deep and boundless as the ocean. It was a loyalty that had never wavered, not in the face of danger, not in the quiet moments of companionship, and certainly not, David now realized with a fresh wave of hope, in the cold, sterile confines of an execution chamber. The memory was a warm ember in the chilling silence, a promise of truth yet to be unearthed, a flawed conviction. The sterile fluorescent lights of the execution chamber hummed, a stark contrast to the vivid, warm memories of Rex that still pulsed in David's mind. The gurney beneath him felt cold, unyielding. He had just requested to see Rex one last time, a desperate, almost nonsensical plea he never expected to be granted. Yet, a guard had nodded, disappearing through the heavy metal door. David closed his eyes, bracing himself, but then the door hissed open again. A collective gasp rippled through the observation room. Rex, magnificent and alert, stepped into the chamber, his ears perked, tail thumping a hesitant rhythm against his flank. But the moment his gaze swept past the wardens and landed on prison guard Miller, a low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest. His hackles rose, a primal warning. This wasn't the calm, focused Rex David knew. This was an animal sensing danger, a threat. The dog's eyes, usually pools of intelligent loyalty, narrowed into slits of suspicion, fixed solely on prison guard Miller, who visibly flinched, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. Rex let out a sharp, insistent bark, his body tensing, ready to spring. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, jolted David back to a different scene, a different kind of horror. It began with a frantic, breathless phone call. Sarah hadn't shown up for her morning shift, hadn't answered her phone. David, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach, had driven to her office. The door was ajar. Inside, the sterile order of her desk was shattered, papers strewn across the floor, a single ceramic coffee mug overturned, its contents dried into a dark stain. A faint metallic scent hung in the air, cloying and sickening. He found her in the small back room, slumped against a filing cabinet, a crimson bloom spreading across her white blouse. Her eyes, usually so vibrant and full of life, stared blankly at the ceiling. The world tilted on its axis. The sirens arrived with a wail that tore through the quiet morning. David, still numb with shock, was ushered out, his hands stained with Sarah's blood, his clothes reeking of her last moments. Detective Harding, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, was the first on the scene, her gaze sweeping over David with an unnerving intensity. "David Miller?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "We need you to come down to the station." The interrogation room was stark, sterile. David recounted every detail of the morning, his voice raw, his mind a chaotic mess of grief and disbelief. Harding listened, her expression unreadable, occasionally scribbling notes. The questions grew sharper, more pointed. "Did you argue recently? Were there any financial difficulties? Anyone Sarah was investigating who might have a grudge?" David shook his head, desperate to help, to find answers. But the evidence, or lack thereof, quickly began to paint a different picture. No forced entry. No signs of struggle beyond Sarah's immediate vicinity. And David's presence at the scene, his hands on her body. The police zeroed in on the simplest explanation, the one that required the least effort. A domestic dispute gone wrong, a husband snapping. It felt absurd, a cruel joke played by fate. The trial was a blur of legal jargon and speculative narratives. The prosecution, spearheaded by a zealous district attorney, painted David as a man under pressure, driven to violence by unseen resentments. They presented a flimsy timeline, circumstantial phone records, and David's initial emotional distress as proof of guilt. There was no murder weapon, no eyewitnesses, no clear motive. Sarah was fiercely principled, yes, a crusader against corruption, but the prosecution deliberately downplayed her investigative work, fearing it would complicate their tidy narrative. They twisted every memory of their loving marriage into something sinister, every disagreement into a prelude to murder. Detective Harding, though leading the investigation, seemed to operate within the confines of what was presented to her. Her cross-examination of David was thorough, almost clinical, but David sensed a flicker of something in her eyes, a residual doubt perhaps, or a quiet unwillingness to fully embrace the easy answer. Yet her testimony, built on the evidence gathered, largely supported the prosecution's case. The jury, swayed by the emotional intensity of the prosecution's narrative and the sheer tragedy of Sarah's death, returned a guilty verdict. David sat there, stunned, the words echoing in his ears. Guilty. It felt like a punch to the gut, a betrayal not just by the legal system, but by the very fabric of reality. He looked at the faces in the courtroom. Sarah's parents, tearful and distraught. Her colleagues, shocked and grim. He wanted to scream, to tear down the walls, to make them understand. He loved Sarah more than life itself. The injustice was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest, suffocating him. He was a man drowning in a sea of fabricated truth, his innocence a silent, unheard cry against the roar of a flawed conviction. Now, in the execution chamber, Rex's growl intensified, a visceral sound that cut through the sterile air. The dog lunged forward, straining against his handler's leash, his focus unwavering on prison guard Miller. A ripple of unease spread through the room. This wasn't just a dog's reaction. It was an alarm, a desperate, loyal warning that screamed, "He knows something!" David's heart pounded, a sudden, desperate hope igniting within him. Rex, his brilliant, intuitive Rex, was not just here for a final farewell. He was here to fight. The metallic clang of the cell door reverberated through the sterile quiet, a stark contrast to the chaotic scene moments earlier in the execution chamber. David, returned to the cramped confines of his solitary cell, sank onto the narrow cot, his mind a whirlwind. Rex. His loyal, gentle Rex. The dog's primal snarl, the baring of teeth directed at prison guard Thompson, replayed in vivid detail. It wasn't the stress or the unfamiliar surroundings. It was too specific, too fierce. Rex had reacted to Thompson, not to the other guards, not to the warden. Confusion warred with a nascent, exhilarating hope. Could Rex truly know something? Could this be the thread that unravelled the tightly woven lie of his conviction? Hours later, the prison's internal phone line rang, a jarring intrusion in Detective Harding's quiet apartment. He answered, his voice groggy with sleep, the digital clock on his nightstand glowing 2:47 a.m. It was Warden Thorne. "Harding, I apologise for the late hour." Thorne's voice was clipped, a tight knot of professional calm, barely concealing underlying agitation. "We had an incident during David Miller's final request." Harding sat upright, A flicker of annoyance at being disturbed, but a deeper professional curiosity piqued. Incident? What kind of incident? He'd closed the Miller case months ago. It had been open and shut, or so he'd believed. Thorne recounted Rex's aggressive display, specifically naming prison guard Thompson as the target of the dog's fury. Harding listened, a frown creasing his brow. A dog got agitated in a high-stress environment? Warden, with all due respect, that's hardly unprecedented. Miller was his owner. The dog was probably distressed by the separation, the atmosphere. It was more than agitation, Detective, Thorne insisted, a note of uncharacteristic urgency in his tone. Rex launched himself at Thompson, attacked him without provocation. Thompson is currently in confinement, shaken and bruised, and Miller believes it's a sign. Harding scoffed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. A sign of what? That the dog misses his owner? Warden, we're talking about an animal, not a witness. Miller is desperate. He's grasping at straws. He had built the case against Miller, presented the evidence that secured the conviction. To suggest an animal could overturn it felt preposterous, an insult to his professional integrity. Yet, a tiny, almost imperceptible seed of doubt began to sprout in the fertile ground of Harding's mind. He had seen countless distraught animals, but Rex had always been exceptionally well-trained, a canine officer known for his unwavering discipline. Aggression of that magnitude, unprovoked and targeted, was profoundly out of character for the German shepherd he remembered from the old case files. I understand your skepticism, Detective, Thorne continued, a sigh audible through the phone. Believe me, I share it. This entire ordeal has been irregular. But Miller's execution is on hold. Legally, I have to investigate any new information, however outlandish it may seem, even if it's just to definitively dismiss it. There was a pause. Then Thorne added with a reluctant resignation, I need you to come in. Review the security footage. Speak with Thompson. Just look into it. Harding rubbed his temples. The last thing he wanted was to reopen a closed case, especially one with such a clear-cut conclusion. But Thorne was the warden, and the request, however inconvenient, carried weight. He pictured Rex, the noble, focused animal he'd read about, now snarling and lunging. It didn't fit, not with the dog he knew. Fine, Harding conceded, the word heavy with reluctant obligation. I'll be there in an hour. But I'm telling you now, Warden, this is a waste of time. Stress manifests in strange ways, even in animals. He hung up, the silence of his apartment feeling heavier than before. He dressed quickly, the image of Rex's bared teeth flashing in his mind. He told himself it was just a dog reacting to a stressful situation. But the image of Thompson cowering, the raw, furious instinct in Rex's eyes, refused to be dismissed. A faint, unsettling chill traced its way down Harding's spine. The case against David Miller had been solid, built on forensic evidence and witness testimony. But what if there was something he had missed? A piece that didn't quite fit into the neat puzzle he had assembled. The seed of doubt, once microscopic, had taken root. The clatter of Rex's claws on the polished concrete floor echoed through the sterile prison corridor. He was led by a handler, not David, but a burly officer with a tight grip on the leash, his expression a mix of caution and apprehension. Thorne had insisted on Rex's return to the facility for observation, a move that sat poorly with many of the guards, who now viewed the canine as a potential threat. Yet, the warden's word was law, And Rex, despite his recent outburst, was a decorated canine officer. His temporary kennel was a modified solitary cell, quiet and isolated, a stark contrast to the bustling canine unit he once called home. For the first few days, Rex was restless. He paced the small cell, his nose constantly working the air, a low whine occasionally escaping his chest. He ate sparingly, his keen eyes scanning every new face that approached his cell. His unusual behaviour during David's final request was a constant topic among the prison staff, fueling a quiet speculation that Thorne's investigation might not be as baseless as some initially believed. Detective Harding, though still outwardly sceptical, found himself returning to the prison more often than he cared to admit, drawn by a nagging curiosity and the warden's persistent calls. On the fourth morning, Harding arrived to find Rex being walked in a rarely used exercise yard, a patch of overgrown grass bordered by the grim, grey walls of the old prison workshop. The handler, a young officer named Miller, struggled to maintain control. Rex wasn't pulling aggressively, but his movements were erratic, his head low, tracking an unseen trail. His tail, usually held high with a confident swagger, was tucked slightly, a sign of intense focus rather than fear. Suddenly, Rex halted. His powerful body tensed, every muscle coiled. He began to sniff furiously at a section of the workshop wall, a patch of crumbling brick near a rusted, boarded-up window. A guttural growl, low and persistent, rumbled from his chest. He started pawing at the brickwork, a frantic, almost desperate digging motion. "Easy, boy," Miller grunted, trying to pull him away. "There's nothing there." But Rex ignored him. He continued to paw, occasionally nudging the mortar with his wet nose, his growl intensifying. Harding, observing from a short distance, felt a prickle of unease. This wasn't just a dog acting out. This was a canine on a scent, a canine working. He remembered the warden's words. Rex is a professional. He doesn't just act out without a reason. Harding approached, a frown creasing his brow. "What's he doing?" "No idea, Detective," Miller replied, still struggling with the dog. "He's been like this for 5 minutes, keeps going back to this spot." Rex let out a sharp bark, then another, louder, more insistent. He scraped harder at the mortar, a small cloud of dust rising around his paws. Harding knelt, inspecting the area. The brickwork looked unremarkable, stained with years of grime and weathering. But as he leaned closer, a faint, almost imperceptible odour reached him. It was sharp, chemical, yet unfamiliar. It wasn't the typical prison smell of disinfectant or stale air. "Get Thorne down here," Harding ordered, his voice sharper than he intended. "And tell him to bring the forensic team." Within minutes, the yard was a flurry of activity. Warden Thorne arrived, his expression grim but unsurprised. The forensic team, led by a meticulous woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, began to cordon off the area. They meticulously photographed the spot where Rex had alerted, then carefully began to chip away at the mortar. Rex, held firmly by Miller, watched the proceedings with unwavering intensity, his low growl a constant background hum. He seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, his focus never wavering from the crumbling wall. Dr. Sharma, a small brush in hand, carefully collected samples from the exposed mortar and the dust Rex had dislodged. She worked silently, her concentration absolute. After what felt like an eternity, she stood, a small sealed bag containing a white powdery residue in her gloved hand. "Interesting," she murmured, holding the bag up to the light. "This isn't a common substance." Harding stepped closer. What is it? Based on the preliminary analysis and the distinctive odour, it appears to be a highly concentrated industrial cleaning agent, Dr. Sharma explained, her gaze meeting Harding's. Specifically, a brand known as SolveClean 700. It's not widely available, typically used in specialized industrial settings or for very specific restoration projects. A cold dread began to settle in Harding's stomach. He remembered the crime scene report from Sarah's apartment, a detail he'd dismissed at the time. A trace amount of an unusual cleaning agent had been found on the floorboards, near where Sarah's body had been discovered. The initial assumption had been that David, in a panicked attempt to clean up, had used something from his own supplies. But SolveClean 700? David was a K9 officer, not an industrial cleaner. SolveClean 700, Harding repeated, the name tasting metallic on his tongue. Are you certain? Dr. Sharma nodded. Positive. The chemical signature is quite unique, and the amount here, though small, is consistent with residue from a spill or an attempt to clean a larger area. Harding's eyes involuntarily flickered to the old workshop, then to Rex, who remained fixated on the wall, a silent sentinel. The open and shut case, once so clear, was starting to fray at the edges, pulled apart by a dog's unwavering loyalty, and a scent only he could truly discern. The air in the exercise yard, once thick with skepticism, now crackled with the electric charge of a truth struggling to surface. Unravelling threads. The sterile air of the execution chamber, thick with the scent of disinfectant and stale fear, still clung to David's skin even after he'd been moved back to his cell. Rex's frantic digging, the raw urgency in his barks, had cracked open a dormant corner of David's mind. SolveClean 700. The name echoed, cold and precise. Then a face materialized in his memory, shrouded by a fine mist of concrete dust and a vague sense of unease. Thompson. David closed his eyes, forcing the fragments to coalesce. It had been weeks before Sarah's death. He'd been working late in the prison's old maintenance workshop, repairing a faulty pressure washer. The rhythmic clang of metal on metal had been the only sound until Thompson had appeared in the doorway, a bucket and a heavy-duty scrub brush in hand. David remembered the oddity of it. Thompson, a guard, not a facilities worker, meticulously scrubbing a section of the exterior wall near the workshop's rear entrance. He'd seemed jumpy, glancing over his shoulder, a sheen of sweat on his brow despite the cool evening air. David had chalked it up to an overzealous guard trying to impress a superior. But now, the image resonated with an unsettling clarity. The faint, acrid smell of a strong cleaning agent had hung in the air that night, a scent David had barely registered at the time, but which now pricked at his olfactory memory. SolveClean 700. Could it be? Miles away, in his cramped office, Detective Harding stared at the forensic report. SolveClean 700. He muttered the name, a sour taste in his mouth. The same unique compound found at Sarah Miller's murder scene, now recovered from a barely perceptible residue on the workshop wall where Rex had gone berserk. It was too specific, too coincidental. Harding pushed aside the paperwork on his desk, his gaze settling on the personnel file for prison guard Thompson, currently in medical confinement after Rex's assault. He started with Thompson's recent financial records, a standard background check initiated after the incident. The initial skim revealed nothing remarkable, but a deeper dive, cross-referencing bank statements with credit card reports, began to paint a different picture. Harding's brow furrowed. Several significant, unexplained cash withdrawals. A string of credit card payments to online gambling sites. far exceeding Thompson's reported income. The amounts were staggering, enough to bury a man in debt, enough to make him desperate. A knot tightened in Harding's stomach. Motive. Next, he pulled the prison's guard schedules for the week of Sarah Miller's murder. Thompson's statement, given during David's initial investigation, claimed he was on duty, working the night shift in a different sector of the prison, far from the workshop or Sarah's home. A convenient, airtight alibi. Harding scrolled through the digital log, his finger tracing the lines of names and assigned posts. Thompson was indeed scheduled for the night shift that week. But then, a red flag. A last-minute shift swap, approved by a supervisor who had since retired. Thompson had traded his night shift for a day shift earlier in the week, putting him off duty entirely on the night of Sarah's murder. Harding leaned back in his chair, the squeak of the worn leather echoing in the sudden silence of the office. He felt a cold dread settle over him. Thompson had lied. His alibi was a fabrication. Why? What was he doing that night? The gambling debts, the frantic clean-up near the workshop, the Solve Clean 700, and now the fabricated alibi. The threads, once disparate and seemingly unrelated, were beginning to weave into a chilling tapestry. Harding picked up the phone, the cold plastic feeling heavy in his hand. He needed to speak to Warden Thorne. This was no longer just about David Miller's execution. It was about a possible conspiracy, a cover-up lurking beneath the bedrock of the prison itself. The open and shut case of Sarah Miller's murder was anything but. It was unraveling, thread by agonizing thread, and in the heart of that unraveling lay the unmistakable scent of deceit. The interrogation. The fluorescent lights of the interrogation room hummed, casting a sterile glow on Guard Thompson's already pale face. Detective Harding leaned forward, his voice a low, steady current against the rising tide of Thompson's defensiveness. "So, Guard Thompson, you maintain you were home the entire night of Sarah Miller's murder?" Thompson shifted, the plastic chair creaking under his weight. A dark bruise bloomed on his temple, a testament to Rex's earlier aggression. "That's what I said. I was sick. Had a nasty bug." "Funny," Harding said, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Your neighbour, Mrs. Henderson, remembers seeing your car leave around midnight and return closer to 3 a.m. She also mentioned you looked perfectly fine the next morning, not sick at all." "Quite the recovery." A vein pulsed in Thompson's neck. "She's mistaken. Old lady's probably confused, senile even." "And your gambling debts?" Harding pressed, ignoring the dismissal. "The ones you accumulated with several loan sharks, totaling over $50,000. That's a powerful motivator, wouldn't you say?" Thompson slammed a fist on the table. "That's got nothing to do with anything. My personal life is my own business. You're harassing me, detective." His voice cracked, the carefully constructed facade beginning to splinter. Harding steepled his fingers. "We found Solve Clean 700 residue at the workshop. A very specific industrial-grade cleaner. The same cleaner found at Sarah Miller's murder scene. And you were seen meticulously cleaning a wall with it near the workshop weeks before her death, weren't you? With your own 2 hands." Thompson's eyes darted around the room, trapped. I was just doing my job. Routine maintenance. That cleaner's everywhere in the prison." "Is it?" Harding challenged, his voice sharpening. "Because our records indicate only a limited supply, specifically logged out to the workshop, and rarely used for anything beyond heavy-duty grease removal. Not for everyday wall cleaning, and certainly not for a guard to be handling without supervision or proper gear, which you clearly weren't using." Just then, the door opened, and two uniformed officers led Rex into the room. The canine was on a short leash, his muscular body coiled with barely contained energy. His head was held high, ears swiveling, taking in the scene. As his gaze landed on Thompson, a low growl rumbled in his chest, vibrating through the silence. Thompson visibly flinched, shrinking back in his chair. "Get that animal out of here! I told you, he's dangerous!" Rex's hackles rose, a bristling ridge of fur along his spine. The growl intensified, a guttural warning that seemed to shake the very air. He strained against the leash, his powerful legs digging into the polished linoleum, his teeth bared in a silent snarl. His eyes, usually warm and intelligent, were now narrowed, fixed on Thompson with an almost primal fury. The officers struggled to hold him back, his deep barks echoing off the walls. It was a terrifying display of pure, unadulterated aggression, unlike anything Thompson had ever seen from the usually disciplined canine. "Easy, Rex," one of the officers grunted, pulling hard on the leash. "Down, boy." But Rex was beyond commands. He lunged forward, a flash of brown and black, snarling and snapping, his focus solely on the terrified guard. Thompson yelped, scrambling backward, overturning his chair in a desperate attempt to create distance. The force of Rex's attack sent the table skidding, the pens and papers scattering across the floor. Harding watched, a grim satisfaction settling over him. The dog's reaction wasn't just aggression. It was a memory, a violent reenactment of a trauma linked directly to Thompson. "That's enough," he finally said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Get him out of here." As Rex was wrestled out, still barking and straining, Thompson remained a crumpled heap against the wall, his breathing ragged, his face slick with sweat. He looked utterly broken, the bravado completely gone. Harding calmly pushed the overturned chair upright. "We also ran a scent analysis on your personal effects, Guard Thompson. Your boots, your uniform, even the watch you wear every day. All tested positive for trace amounts of Solve Clean 700. The same distinct chemical signature we found at both crime scenes. It's not a common household cleaner, Thompson. It's rare, potent, and now it's all over you." The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by Thompson's shallow gasps. Harding watched him, knowing the walls were closing in, and that soon Warden Thorne would be receiving a call that would shake the very foundations of the prison. The open and shut case was anything but. Confession and conspiracy. The biting, sterile air of the holding cell magnified the throbbing in Thompson's jaw, a raw souvenir of Rex's fangs. Hunched on the narrow cot, he breathed in a cloying mix of antiseptic and stale perspiration. The canine's image, eyes blazing with an almost human ferocity, was etched into his memory. Harding entered, trailed by Warden Thorne, whose typically impassive features were now etched with a grim curiosity. "Guard Thompson," Thorne's voice, a low rumble, broke the silence. "Detective Harding has some inquiries. Given the circumstances, I strongly advise you to speak candidly." Harding leaned against the cell's doorframe, arms crossed, his gaze unyielding. "Let's discuss Solve Clean 700, Thompson. We located it at Sarah Miller's residence. We found it in the prison workshop, a workshop you meticulously scrubbed the day following Sarah's murder. And we found traces of it on your personal effects. A highly specific industrial cleaner, not a household item." Thompson's breath hitched. His eyes flitted between Harding's steady stare and Thorne's expectant frown. He swallowed, a dry rasp in his throat. I clean the workshop regularly. It's part of my duties." "Is cleaning up murder scenes also part of your duties, Thompson?" Harding's voice remained level, yet a steely edge had sharpened it. Because that's what this is beginning to resemble. Your neighbour placed you near Sarah Miller's house that night. Your gambling debts are extensive. And then there's Rex. Harding paused, allowing the canine's violent outburst to hang unspoken in the oppressive air. That dog has never shown aggression towards anyone unless provoked. Certainly not a fellow officer. Yet he launched himself at you with an unprecedented savagery, almost as if he remembered something traumatic. Colour drained from Thompson's face. He clasped his hands, knuckles bone white. The cascade of accusations, the mounting evidence, the dog's inexplicable fury, it all converged, pressing in. He felt the cell walls constricting. A tremor snaked through him, starting in his hands and climbing to his shoulders. He squeezed his eyes shut, as if to blot out the damning reality. "I didn't kill her," he choked out, the words a desperate whisper. "I swear to God, I didn't kill Sarah." "Then what did you do, Thompson?" Harding pressed, his voice now a low, insistent hum. "Because everything points to you." The dam broke. Thompson's shoulders began to heave. Hot, shameful tears streamed down his face. I just cleaned up. That's all, I swear. They told me to clean up." Thorne stepped forward, his expression hardening. "Who told you to clean up, Guard Thompson? And what precisely were you cleaning?" Thompson sniffed, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "The house. Sarah's house. I was instructed to make it look like nothing had happened, to erase anything that connected anyone." He looked up, his eyes wide and haunted. "It was after she was gone. I received a call, a burner phone, a voice I didn't recognize, but they knew about my debts. They said, 'Clean it,' and the slate's wiped clean." Harding's gaze flickered to Thorne. "Go on, Thompson. Who were they?" "I don't know his name," Thompson wailed, burying his face in his hands again. "He just said it was for the warden's interest. That's what he said, for the warden's interest." He lifted his head, his eyes fixing on Thorne with a terrified plea. "I didn't know what I was getting into, sir. I just needed the money. They threatened my family." Thorne's jaw clenched. "Are you implying someone within my administration is involved in a murder and a cover-up, Thompson?" His voice was dangerously low. Not you, sir," Thompson stammered, shrinking back. "The voice. He said he worked for a high-up official. Someone who had a lot to lose if her investigations came out." "Investigations?" Harding interjected, seizing on the word. "What investigations?" "She was digging," Thompson whispered, his voice barely audible. "She was asking too many questions about the prison's supply chain, about the new medical contracts, about how certain packages were getting in and out." He shivered. "Drugs, Detective. She was onto a high-level drug smuggling operation, controlled from the inside." Harding's eyes narrowed. This wasn't merely a murder. It was a conspiracy. Sarah Miller, David's wife, hadn't been killed in a jealous rage. She'd been silenced because she posed a threat. And now, a terrified and broken prison guard was laying it all bare. The pieces were locking into place with horrifying precision. The open and shut case was anything but. And Rex, with his primal, unyielding fury, had been the first to sense the rot. "Who specifically did this voice implicate, Thompson?" Harding's voice was firm, cutting through the guard's fear. "Give me a name, a position, anything." Thompson whimpered, shaking his head. "He just said, the deputy warden's operation." Thorne reeled back as if struck, his face a mask of shock and dawning horror. The deputy warden. The implication hung heavy in the air, a chilling realization that the corruption ran deeper, higher than anyone had imagined. Harding watched Thompson, a grim satisfaction settling over him. This wasn't the full story, not yet, but it was enough to blow David Miller's case wide open. Justice served. The sterile fluorescent lights of the execution chamber hummed, casting a pallid glow on the assembled witnesses. David lay strapped to the gurney, his breath shallow, eyes fixed on the ceiling. A tear traced a path down his temple. The executioner, a shadow behind a one-way mirror, tightened his grip on the lever. A hushed silence permeated the room, broken only by the faint whir of unseen machinery. Suddenly, a cacophony erupted from the observation room. Shouts, the scrape of chairs, and the unmistakable bark of a K9 sliced through the oppressive quiet. A guard, pale and breathless, burst into the chamber. "Hold! Stop the execution! We have a confession!" The words hung in the air, surreal and impossible. David blinked, his mind struggling to process the sudden reprieve. The executioner's hand, poised over the lever, slowly retracted. Warden Thorne, who had been observing with a stoic, grim expression, now stood frozen, a mask of disbelief etched on his face. Hours later, the prison was a maelstrom of activity. News vans clogged the entrance, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like metallic sunflowers. Reporters clamoured for information, their voices a persistent drone against the stark concrete walls. Inside, David sat in a small interview room, no longer in an orange jumpsuit, but in a plain grey uniform provided by the prison. Rex, his head resting on David's knee, whined softly, occasionally nuzzling his hand. David's eyes, once dulled by despair, now held a glimmer of bewildered hope. Detective Harding, his face a mixture of exhaustion and grim satisfaction, entered the room. "David, you're officially exonerated. Thompson's confession, along with the forensic evidence we've re-examined, has cleared your name completely." A wave of relief, so profound it was almost painful, washed over David. He closed his eyes, a silent prayer of thanks forming on his lips. Rex licked his hand, as if sensing the shift in his human's emotional landscape. "Thompson cooperated," Harding continued, "after we presented him with irrefutable proof of his involvement. He confessed to cleaning up the scene, but maintained he was coerced. He implicated Deputy Warden Wallace, stating Wallace ordered him to cover up the murder and frame you, specifically because Sarah was investigating a drug smuggling operation within the prison. Wallace's operation. Warden Thorne, who had been present for the tail end of Thompson's interrogation, now paced his office, a vein throbbing in his temple. The revelation about Deputy Warden Wallace, his trusted second-in-command, had shattered his perception of his own institution. The betrayal stung deeper than any professional slight. It was a personal affront to the integrity he had strived to uphold. Wallace, a man whose veneer of authority had always been impeccable, was apprehended in his office, attempting to shred documents. The arrest was swift, devoid of the dramatic struggle often depicted in films. He offered no resistance, only a chillingly placid stare as the handcuffs clicked into place. The charges against him were extensive: murder, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and operating a criminal enterprise within a state facility. The legal proceedings that followed were a whirlwind, fueled by public outrage and relentless media scrutiny. The image of Rex, the loyal canine partner, alerting to the true killer during David's final moments, became an iconic symbol of justice served. The prosecution, spearheaded by a newly invigorated district attorney, presented a meticulous case. Thompson's testimony, corroborated by forensic evidence that had been deliberately overlooked or suppressed, painted a damning picture. The altered lab reports, the conveniently misplaced security footage, the sudden transfer of key personnel, all pointed to Wallace's calculated efforts to protect his illicit drug trade. David, now a free man, attended every hearing. He watched as Wallace, stripped of his power and prestige, was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Thompson, due to his cooperation, received a reduced sentence for his role in the cover-up, but would still spend a significant portion of his life behind bars. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Vigils were held, protests organised, demanding prison reform, and Rex was hailed as a national hero. Petitions for canine recognition and protection flooded legislative offices. David, no longer defined by the accusations, found himself at the centre of a story far larger than his own. He spoke to reporters, his voice steady, his message clear. This isn't just about me. It's about every person who has been failed by the system. It's about Sarah, whose pursuit of truth cost her everything. He rarely appeared without Rex by his side, the dog's presence a constant, comforting reminder of the unbreakable bond that had ultimately brought the truth to light. The memory of Sarah's vibrant spirit, her unwavering dedication to justice, now burned brighter than ever, no longer overshadowed by the injustice of her death. Justice, finally, had been served. Unbreakable bond. The heavy steel door of the visiting room slid open with a soft hiss, and David stood on the threshold, a tremor running through him that had nothing to do with fear. He saw him then, a familiar silhouette against the muted light of the room, tail wagging a furious rhythm against the floor. Rex! The name tore from David's throat, ragged with relief, and a lifetime's worth of unspoken words. Rex launched himself forward, a blur of golden fur and unrestrained joy. He didn't just greet David, he attacked him with affection, knocking the wind out of David's chest as he slammed into him. David stumbled back, laughing, tears streaming down his face as Rex's wet nose nudged his neck, his tail thumping against his back. David knelt, burying his face in Rex's thick fur, inhaling the familiar scent of dog, of loyalty, of home. Rex whined, a low, rumbling sound of contentment, then licked David's face with fervent enthusiasm, as if trying to wash away the years of pain. David wrapped his arms around the dog, holding him tight, feeling the powerful thrum of his heartbeat against his own. It was a reunion that transcended words, a raw, visceral affirmation of a bond that had defied steel bars and false accusations. Hours melted into a blur of shared silence and quiet companionship. Rex lay with his head on David's lap, occasionally sighing contentedly, his eyes never leaving David's face. David stroked his fur, tracing the familiar lines of his powerful shoulders, feeling the warmth radiating from him. The world outside, with its clamour of justice served and wrongs righted, seemed distant and secondary. This quiet, unbroken connection was the true victory. News outlets across the nation had been captivated by Rex's story. "Canine hero unmasks killer," screamed one headline. "The dog who saved an innocent man," declared another. Rex, once a loyal canine partner, was now a national symbol of unwavering fidelity. His uncanny ability to link Thompson to the murder, his persistent aggression, his unyielding scent memory, had become the stuff of legend. The public, weary of cynicism, embraced the purity of Rex's actions, showering him with adoration. Children sent him fan mail and drawings, while animal rights organizations lauded him as a testament to the profound intelligence and emotional depth of animals. David, still navigating the bewildering landscape of his newfound freedom, was often asked to speak about Rex. "He's more than a hero," David would say, his voice resonating with deep emotion. "He's family. He saw the truth when no one else would. He never gave up on me." He recounted the terrifying moments in the execution chamber, the electric tension, and Rex's sudden, decisive intervention. Each retelling cemented Rex's place in the annals of justice. The process of rebuilding a life, however, was not without its quiet challenges. David found an old, quiet cabin nestled by a lake, far from the harsh concrete and steel of the city. It was a place where the air smelled of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the sterile scent of the prison. Here, he and Rex began their new chapter. Mornings were spent on long walks through the woods, Rex trotting ahead, nose to the ground, occasionally casting a glance back at David, as if ensuring he was still there. Afternoons found them by the lake, David fishing, while Rex patiently watched, sometimes even dipping a paw into the cool water. David began volunteering at a local animal shelter, dedicating himself to fostering the bonds between humans and their canine companions. He became an outspoken advocate for prison reform, using his harrowing experience to shed light on systemic injustices. He spoke about the need for compassionate intervention, for re-evaluating open and shut cases, and for recognizing the often overlooked signs that can unravel a conspiracy. Sarah's legacy, he vowed, would be one of change, of ensuring that no other innocent person would suffer the fate he had so narrowly escaped. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings, as Rex lay curled at his feet, David would look at him, a profound sense of gratitude washing over him. Rex didn't understand the complexities of legal proceedings, or the intricate web of deception that had almost cost David his life. But he understood loyalty. He understood the difference between right and wrong with an instinctual clarity that had eluded even the most seasoned investigators. Their bond, forged in training and tested by tragedy, had emerged not just intact, but strengthened, a testament to an unbreakable connection that had, quite literally, saved a life and unveiled the truth. Justice, David often reflected, wasn't always found in courtrooms or legal precedents. Sometimes it was found in the unwavering gaze of a loyal dog, in the incredible power of a scent memory, and in the primal, undeniable truth of an unbreakable bond.